Every month, Cheryl Manton makes a pilgrimage to the grave of her brother. I'd never heard of this feisty woman until I began researching the story of our war dead. Maurice Manton was killed during the Vietnam War. That he lies in New Zealand soil is entirely down to his sister. Our government said it would cost his grieving family $10,000, a fortune in 1967, to repatriate Maurice's body.
He was my big brother. He and I were exceptionally close. And when the military came around and told us that his body would be taken back to Terendak, Malaya, for burial, something in me just snapped. And I decided, no, he wasn't going to be buried there. He was going to come home.
Maury Manton did come home, for free thanks to the Americans, but his family were left hurting. Since Cheryl's stand, it is now accepted that every New Zealand soldier killed while on active duty overseas will be returned home.
I still feel bitter about it, the way we were treated, but at least we got him home and nobody ever had to go through that dreadful hassle again.
For most of the past century, it was expected that our war dead would forever lie in foreign fields. But should they? I'm Witi Ihimaera. My uncle, Rangiora Keelan, is one of those soldiers who lie in foreign fields. Rangi was my mother's much-loved brother, and he was killed in action in Tunisia during World War II in 1943. Mum died in 2010, but throughout her entire adult life she wished for one thing. She wanted to bring his body home. And there's Mum, up there with Dad, and the tupuna of the valley. My mother wanted Rangiora to be buried amongst our whānau, an important tradition for many Māori. Kia ora tupuna, kia ora whānau, kia ora Mum, kia ora Dad. Anei taku pānui, Mum. Ka haere au, ki Tunisia, ki te rangi, tō tuakana. Pākehā may have different attitudes to the war dead, but as Māori, claiming our dead has always been important. We did that in the distant past and it remains the default position for most Māori today. Before she died, my mother enlisted my help to try and persuade the New Zealand government to repatriate the remains of my uncle from a faraway war cemetery in North Africa. But we failed, and I felt I'd let my mother down, let my uncle down, a man who'd made the ultimate sacrifice for his country. I turned my frustration into fiction. Down the years, I have written a lot about war and service. The Anzac theme touches us all, Māori and Pākehā alike. Nearly every New Zealand community has a war memorial with its roll of honour. And increasingly we're visiting the war cemeteries overseas where fallen family members lie, row upon row. Almost 30,000 Kiwi servicemen and women were killed during the two world wars, and where they have individual graves, they lie in more than 2,500 Commonwealth cemeteries around the globe. The writer Rudyard Kipling said these war cemeteries were the greatest human achievements since the pharaohs. And I think he's right. In these places of death, history comes alive, and we feel what it means to be a New Zealander. I've been researching some individual gravestones and the stories behind the names carved forever in stone. Trooper Peter White, Captain Peka Makar, Trooper Adrian Thomas, Corporal Jack Dunn, and of course my own uncle, Private Rangiora Keelan. I'll meet the families of these men and hear their extraordinary deeds, and I'll be travelling to the sites where they lie buried to this very day. Kuala Lumpur. During the 1950s, New Zealand troops were here during the Malay conflict.
Kia ora, tēnā koe.
In 1956, Paul Thomas's brother Adrian was the first New Zealand casualty fighting the communist insurgency. Paul was just 8 when his family received the terrible news.
I heard my mum wailing. So I knew that something had happened. I didn't realise it was Adrian. And I guess one of the things that I feel now, after all these years, you know, it's been 61 years now since Adrian was killed. My mum and dad were never given the opportunity to bring his body back, his remains back to New Zealand.
What I'm interested in is that it was your mother who asked you to bring Adrian back, and it was my mother who said she wanted to bring her brother back. And it's interesting that women, the mothers, seem to be the ones who were emotionally involved in all of that. And I know in Māori we have this concept, don't we, of whenua. What do you think in terms of that concept?
His whenua was buried in Waimahana.
His placenta.
His placenta was buried in Waimahana. And when that person dies, our tikanga tells us that that person should go back to where his placenta is buried before the wairua can have any peace.
In 2014, Paul co-founded Families of the Forgotten Fallen, an organisation dedicated to repatriating the remains of 37 Kiwi servicemen and women who lie in Southeast Asian soil. After meeting with their families and debating with the New Zealand government, Paul succeeded in 2017, and now most will be coming home. Adrian Thomas lies in Cheras Road Cemetery in the heart of Kuala Lumpur. Paul has come here often, but this is the first time since the government's decision to pay for repatriation. As an old soldier, badly wounded in Vietnam, he, more than most, understands the pact between a country and its servicemen and women.
Well, here he is. E tātua, whakatapua mātou, o tēnei wā. E haere mai mātou, ki te taku tuakana, e hoki ana ki Aotearoa. When I first came here, 1968, none of this was here. Part of my campaign was this was not a resting place for people that have made sacrifices to defend our government's policies. And, you know, I applaud the New Zealand government for making a decision to allow us to repatriate, because I think our servicemen who are buried in Malaysia deserve nothing better.
It's been an honour, Paul. It's been an honour to be here with you, and to know you're doing this for your mother. And your mother will be very, very pleased and very proud of you. For 40 years you've kept this promise to her, and it is time for you to take your brother, her son, back to her.
Kia ora, mate. Kia ora. E te hua, te tuakala, e hari ana taku ngā kau, ko hoki mai koe, ki Aotearoa. You know, over the years I've had quite a negative feeling to, you know, there's been anger, frustration, but today all that is gone. You know, I just looking around and meeting some of our servicemen that have been that are buried in here, and I even suggested to a couple of blokes in there that you know, it's time to send green grass home.
Kia ora, Paul.
Nā koe.
Battle on, kia kaha. The old town will be waiting as he steps down from the train, and there to meet him will be his mama and his papa. Down the road he'll walk, and there comes Mary, hair of gold and lips like cherries. He'll be happy to be in the green grass of home. It's been 100 years since World War I ended. The global conflict took the lives of nearly 13 million fighting men and women. Before the Great War, only the mighty were given monuments, but huge social changes at the time would forever change how we honour our dead.
Well, before the First World War, the treatment of ordinary soldiers had often been little more than throwing them into a pit and covering them over. And during the First World War, what we saw is something very different entirely, the idea that every individual soldier would be commemorated equally.
The Houses of Parliament in London debated who had responsibility for the war dead, the families or the state.
Was it the state which was responsible for commemoration, or individual families, as was the tradition? And so the decision was taken that the state would effectively establish the rules of what would happen. That was really the beginning of what became the Imperial War Graves Commission, now called the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. It was down really to one man, Fabian Ware, who was the architect of this great system. He was sent over with a Red Cross unit to care for the wounded, but he soon became concerned about the care of the dead. He felt that something needed to be done to make sure that the burial places of soldiers wouldn't be lost and go unrecorded. And that was the beginning of this great process of creating the war cemeteries and memorials that we know so well today. The War Graves Commission initially was made up of many individuals who had unique talents and brought their experience to bear. One of the most important was Rudyard Kipling. He was a very famous author. He also had a very personal connection. He'd lost his own son, Jack, fighting in 1915 at the Battle of Loos. And he was really called upon to be the spokesperson for the War Graves Commission. He wrote many leaflets and pamphlets to explain to the public what was being done and why it was a good idea. And he also came up with many of the wordings for the memorials and the headstones. One of the most famous is the engraving on the headstones of unknown soldiers who couldn't be identified. And it just says, "A soldier of the Great War, known unto God." So he was really one of the key architects of the system of commemoration that we know so well today.
I've come here because I want to know why these cemeteries continue to be so important in the modern world.
You know, these were great cataclysmic events of the 20th century, and they came at a time when society was changing, when technology was changing. And I think they are a supreme and abiding memorial. You know, they're a tangible reminder of that history. They are places that are still preserved now. I mean, what's very striking to me is that we're still finding the bodies of First World War soldiers. They're still being buried today. So that work is continuing. It's not as if these are simply memorials to be looked after. They're a living memorial in many ways to those soldiers.
It's that unending vigil, isn't it?
It's an unending vigil.
In 1917, the Commonwealth nations, including New Zealand, came to a revolutionary agreement that the war dead would be remembered equally, regardless of status, creed, or colour. And we continue to pay 2% of the War Graves Commission budget, which reflects the number of our casualties. That far-reaching decision meant our fallen would be buried close to where they fell and forever lie in foreign soil.
These graves, you can see the maple leaf of Canada. Over here you have some RAF pilots, Australians, South Africans, but we're just getting to the section where you have New Zealand service personnel buried. And as far as the eye can see in both directions, you can see the fern and the letters for New Zealand underneath.
And
next to him,
Private Paki, tēnā kōrewa, te hoko whitu toa tūmātauenga, moi mai rā. When you see it like this, Glenn, you realise just how personal these stories are. All cemeteries like this are visited by more and more people every year. There's a growing interest in honouring the war dead, and it's spawned a new kind of tourism, battlefield tourism. Belgium, just outside of Ypres. The Ka whānau from near my hometown on the east coast have arrived at Kandahar Farm Cemetery to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the death of their ancestor, Pekama Ka. He was a 23-year-old captain of the New Zealand Pioneer Battalion who was killed during the opening stages of the Battle of Passchendaele.
There were only 4 who were together, and it was
right.
Hale,
Pekama,
Ruru, and Pona Winyana. And they are all on a separate cemetery on Underhill Farm, so he is the only one that has been brought here, and they did that because he was an officer.
It was during a period of intense shelling where Pekama's luck finally ran out.
He directed and ordered the evacuation of men from the trench who were wounded. Regrettably, in that delay, further artillery landed and killed him and some others outright. Pekama was a hero, and we honour him, we remember him for his great deeds. To honour him and what he contributed to the defence of New Zealand and indeed the British Empire.
The family are taken to where Pekama died near Ypres. Today there are few signs that hundreds of thousands of men fought and died here. This gentle pond is in fact one of 19 mine craters, the result of hundreds of tons of ammunition detonated beneath the German trenches in the early hours of June 7, 1917. Pekama and the New Zealand Pioneer Battalion would have witnessed these explosions.
And here he was killed. within 100 meters, 100, 200 meters maximum. Yes, okay.
The Carr family came here thinking they wanted Pekama home, but since they've been here, they've changed their minds.
I think Peckham is in the right place right now. 100 years he's been here, and where he is a beautiful setting. And I think he's at peace here. And I think I'm quite happy to leave him here, right, in peace.
How many requests do you get a year from families wanting to have the remains of their loved ones returned?
It's actually relatively rare these days. I think partly because it's understood that this was the way things were done at the time. This was the decision that was taken collectively by the governments which formed the War Graves Commission. But there are, of course, certain cultures around the world, like the Maori culture, where this is difficult to comprehend. But I think it is something that we need to recognise is a historical decision.
Our government's policy was that anyone killed before 1955 would stay where they were. Uncle Rangiora, who died in the Second World War, falls into this category. The Americans have a different outlook. Since World War I, they have brought home 60% of their war dead, and there have been special cases of Commonwealth soldiers who were allowed to come home. I'm still hopeful. Our dead are buried in this Brookfield cemetery just outside of London. They have no chance of coming home. On the other hand, they are being well looked after here. So I'm in a bit of a dilemma as to whether or not they should stay here. However, for Indigenous people, the urge for us to have our loved ones back home, if we want it, we're going to have to fight for it. I'm in Turkey, the place where the New Zealand nation was in effect founded after the disastrous defeat at Gallipoli. My guide is historian Kenan Çelik, one of Turkey's leading experts on the Dardanelles campaign and a guide to the battlefields of the peninsula for more than 25 years. In what direction did the New Zealanders land? On the 25th of April 1915, British, French, Australian and New Zealand troops landed along the coast of the Gallipoli Peninsula. It was a battle of disappointment and death that lasted less than a year. And can you tell me where the New Zealanders landed?
Just along the beach, just around the corner over there.
The landings weren't easy. Many soldiers were killed before they even got off the beach. The sea ran red with blood. Down here, I'm just going to do a Maori ceremonial. It's you bless yourself when you are in a sacred place like this. And the men who survived the landing were confronted with steep bluffs and ravines. They had to slog their way inland all the time under fire from Ottoman Turks up on high. By July 1915, there was stalemate. Then, on the 25th, the New Zealand Māori contingent arrived and were sent up to No. 1 outpost. They were initially there as non-combatants, digging trenches and moving supplies up to the front. So there were 400 Māori soldiers here.
Mm-hmm. And that hill over there, known as No. 1 outpost, also known as Maori Hill, they came here in July, so mostly they took part in the operations.
They were taken through the Big Sap to outpost No. 1. General Godley, who was commander of the New Zealand and Australian Division, made his way from his headquarters about 2 kilometres through the Big Sap to the outpost. And when he arrived, the 500 men of the Maori contingent did the haka for him. And it created quite a stir amongst the Turks, especially, who were just up above There were reports in the Istanbul newspapers that the cannibals had arrived on the peninsula.
In more recent years, the haka troubled the Turks so much it was banned for 10 years. But the mana of those men compels my own haka, recognizing them and this sacred place.
Kia rite, kia rite, kia rite, wai wai takehia. E kino nei hoki. Ho kamate kamate kara kara. Kamate kamate kara kara. Tēnei te tangata puhuru huru nāna nei whakawhiti tērā. Hopane kopane. Hopane kopane whiti tērā.
The Maori soldiers only stayed at that camp for about 4 weeks at the most before they moved north and took part in the assault on Chunuk Bair.
There's a name I'm searching for on the memorial to the missing at Chunuk Bair, Jack Dunn.
This one.
His story is particularly sad. His great-nephew back in New Zealand has uncovered some information on what happened to Jack more than 100 years ago.
He was born in Tinui, which is in the Wairarapa. His brother Matt also enlisted with the horse troops, so they both ended up on Gallipoli.
Jack Dunn was part of the Wellington Regiment and had been in Gallipoli since the initial landings in April, but by July was worn out and sick. Having been put on sentry duty one night, his fatigue was to get the better of him.
2 hours after he was supposed to be relieved, he was found by an officer fast asleep, and he was court-martialed and he was sentenced to death.
Jack was kept in a shell crater for 3 weeks, waiting for the sentence to be handed down.
I find it sort of bad dream territory to try and imagine what he was going through. Nothing in his existence would have prepared him for that situation. Nothing.
This remarkable photo shows the court-martial being read out to the men of Jack's regiment. Jack, bareheaded with his back to the camera, is at the bottom of the photo. Kainan takes me to where he thinks the photo was taken, Quinn's Post in Monash Gully.
So right down there, the decision was read to him after he was court-martialed.
You know, the family never knew that about any of this, so this is going to be good news for them.
Yes, yes.
General Hamilton, the supreme commander of the Gallipoli campaign, heard of Jack's plight and had his death sentence remitted. Little did Jack and his mates know that the battle for Chunuk Bair was about to begin.
The feeling of relief would have been tempered with the thought that they were due to carry out a major assault. While there's life, there's hope. And so he would have thought, well, at least I'm alive, and let's get on with it.
760 New Zealand soldiers, including Māori troops who fought together with Pākehā troops for the very first time in Europe, attempted to wrest the heights from the enemy in a pitched battle which lasted 4 days.
The photo shows 700 men have been sentenced to death, because at that time the regiment had received their orders to proceed to the foot of Chunuk Bair, to climb it and take it, which they did. And of around 760 that went up there, 700 remain up there to this day.
Oh, where Jack, having been given a reprieve from his death sentence just 3 days earlier, was one of those killed during the fight for Chunuk Bair. His body was never found, and his bones lie somewhere here, just below the crest of the hill.
He died with men who were his mates. And sometimes it's enough to have the story.
Today, many people from many nations visit Gallipoli. People are often surprised that there are not many graves. Countless dead on both sides couldn't be identified or found.
From my family, 3 died here in Gallipoli, and I couldn't find their names on the list, and I couldn't find where they were killed. So hard, and hard to find today. My grandmother used to say, went to Gallipoli, never came back. This is what Turkish people say mostly when you ask them what happened to your relative in Gallipoli. Just went and didn't come back.
As Ataturk said in 1934, your sons are now our sons. And under the Commonwealth Grave Mandate, the Gallipoli graves will be protected forever. But what happens if you believe, as I do, that the fallen should always return home? There are 2,500 Commonwealth war cemeteries around the world, but not all are easy to visit for reasons of geography or politics. When we think of our fallen, we mostly think of Gallipoli or the Western Front, but I have always wanted to come here, to Israel, to understand New Zealand's unique role in the World War I Palestine campaign. How, following Gallipoli, some 2,000 Kiwi horsemen and their horses finally got their own back on the Ottoman Turks and helped turn the tide of war. I'm meeting Steve Butler in the city of Jaffa, now called Yafo.
G'day, Steve. Oh, how are you? How are you? Good to see you.
Steve runs the Mounted Rifles website in New Zealand, and he's a keen custodian of the long-forgotten story of the New Zealand horsemen.
Why do you think that this is the forgotten war in New Zealand?
Because the emphasis on reporting and giving the news to the British people, they were more focused on what was happening to their men in France and Belgium, and so the press were releasing and publishing more stories about that.
Jaffa was the scene of a climactic battle that took place late in 1917.
3 New Zealand regiments of the New Zealand Mounted Rifles defeated the Turks in a massive rout. It was truly one of the great victories of World War I.
Jaffa was secured in November 1917. From here, the Kiwis would go on to dominate the enemy. They blew up bridges, they attacked railways, they took more ground than any other army in World War I. For the mounted horsemen, it was a long road getting to Jaffa. Over the previous year, they'd attacked Gaza several times and suffered many casualties. So they decided on a new and daring strategy, which, in time, proved to be brilliant.
What we can see here is that Gaza was the area they wanted. They'd had 2 attacks on it. The third, they were waiting for them, but this was the line that they were defending right across to Beersheba. But what the New Zealanders and Australians did was that they swung south, deep into the desert, and then come right round the corner and out of the desert with an unexpected attack. And you can see here that Tel El Saba was the high ground, and that had to be removed before the Australians could charge into Beersheba.
Today, the hill outside Beersheba is an archaeological site.
In 1917, all this hill was covered. You could not see what we see now.
So where was the gun emplacements?
On the top of the hill.
Where did the cavalry come from?
They came from that direction and they went along the wadi and the wall of the city and the wadi, Beersheba Wadi, and they climbed up from that direction to the
Oh,
hill.
okay, so there's the wadi there.
This is Wadi Beersheba.
Ah, so for the New Zealanders to come up through that wadi, there was no cover. It was murderous.
It took a day of hard fighting, but the Kiwis eventually took the hill. It opened the door for the Australian light horse to then take the town of Beersheba. Beersheba today is a bustling Israeli town. In 1917, it was just a dusty railway hub on the far edge of the Ottoman Empire, and it was of huge strategic importance to the Allies. Taking Beersheba opened the door to the entire Middle East.
From this point of Beersheba onwards, the New Zealand Mounted Rifles covered in 14 days all the way to Jaffa, which was one of the great advances during the First World War. Actually, what I wanted to show you also was they are the colours.
It has a Māori inscription on it, Te Kahu Mataara.
Yes, the vigilant hawk.
One of the young Kiwis killed taking the hill outside Beersheba was West Coast volunteer Peter White. John White and his son David knew almost nothing of their relative until they did a little digging.
That's the photo of Uncle Peter, which hung up on the wall in the passage in the house in Matamata.
We know from his war record that he was killed on that first morning, 31st of October.
Peter George White had worked as an accountant in Westport before enlisting in the Mounted Rifles in 1916. He took part in the fight for Tel El Sabah, where the Kiwi horsemen took out the Turkish guns. But he met his death in a hail of machine gun fire during the attack. He was just 26 years old.
So after the war, the government issued to the family of those that had been killed a plaque. As you can see, it's got Peter's name on it.
Yeah.
So that was sent out to his mum, and the records show in 1921.
Yep. And that's what they call the death penny, yeah?
That's right, that's called a death penny.
Peter's brother David survived the war. His nephew and grandnephew may never visit Peter's grave, so they've done the next best thing. They've asked me to be their messenger.
So I thought, Dad, what we might do is, since we can't be there, is we've made up just a card with Peter's photograph and his medals on it, and get that left at his grave this year, being the 100th, and so that those that are visiting the cemetery, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of people there in the next month or two, they'll be able to see that actually the name on the headstone actually relates to a person.
A person,
yeah.
So that's a good idea.
We can get that taken across for us.
So young Peter White's grave is hereabouts. Here it is. One of the unlucky ones, I'm afraid.
Your family, your whānau, wanted us to bring this to you. They couldn't make the journey themselves, but they come with all of their love, their aroha, which we're bringing to you. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kena ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. I hia kena te arakura, te hei moriora. Tūturu whakamaua kia tēnā, haumi e, hui e, tai ki e. Although, Peter, you're far from home, there's a sense of peace here. You're with your mates. And as I prepare for the last leg of my journey to North Africa, I wonder whether I will feel that same sense of peace for my uncle Rangiora. Well, before I left New Zealand, I had something important to do. I visited Tolaga Bay to collect shells and river stones because I knew I was heading to Tunisia, where my uncle has lain in foreign soil for the last 75 years. I wanted to take him a little piece of home. Mum did the same thing when she went to see him 30 years ago. So I'm here in Tunisia for the first time. For me, this is the end of my pilgrimage. It's where the war grave story becomes personal. When World War II began, Rangiora answered the call. In March 1943, he was with 14,000 other Kiwi boys facing off against the might of the German and Italian armies here in Tunisia, North Africa. Uncle Rangi, along with 21 Maori battalion soldiers, including VC winner Moana Ngarimu, were killed capturing a hill called Point 209. They lie in Esvak Cemetery by a dusty desert road.
So this highway that we're travelling, Mum and Dad travelled this 30 years ago to this month, same month, in 1987 they came here. So it's really exciting for me to be travelling the same roads as they travelled to see her brother.
There are 177 Kiwis buried at Esvaks, and they all deserve the utmost respect, for they gave their lives so that we could live ours in peace. I arrived just in time to call my tipuna before the sun sets. Uia mai koe whakahu a ti ake, ko wai te whare nei e, ko te kane, ko wai te teko teko ke runga, ko nāna noho ki roto tahi oue, oue, he koruru koe koro e. So my mother, when she was here with Dad, they didn't have much time to find her brother. And she told me that what she saw was a little bird, and the little bird flew over her head. And she said to Dad, we have to follow that bird. And so she followed the bird, and the bird led her to his grave. She put the stones there. I wonder if they're still there, but Uncle Rangi, ko tai mai nei. I am Mum. I'm bringing her again to you. She has been dying of love for you. She came back, Uncle. She came back. She said to me she would like to have you brought home. So the choice is to leave you here or to bring you home. But should it be one or should it be all? Nā reira, Uncle, Mum, what do we do now? Mā waira, e taurima, e te marae wahonei. I come on behalf of the whānau, and they would wish also to leave some tohu behind for you, some paua from the ocean, some greenstone from Mount Hikurangi. And because Mum told me that you were a very sophisticated man, I bring also something that I know you would have worn. Every year from 1943, your darling sister put an advertisement in the paper, the Gisborne Herald, to honour you and to remember you, and that you had died here in Tunisia on the 26th of March 1943. And I was born 1 year later, and she always said that I looked like you. Sometime, to every lonely one, sometime someone comes along. Somewhere there is an only one singing love's old song. The grey skies above you will turn to fairest blue sometime. Someone will whisper, we love you true. Uncle Rangi's war was over, but the Allies continued their push west, kicking the Germans out of North Africa for good. One of the last battles in that campaign was fought here at Takruna, where Māori soldiers scaled the cliffs and, it's said, tossed the enemy over the side. Who knows? It's unbelievable to think that they were here. Here in the wind and the sky and the earth, in the sounds of a humanity that they were trying to save and trying to help. I think that they should be proud. We should be proud of those boys who came here. The next day, as I return to Esbeck's cemetery to say my final goodbye, I spot local caretakers attending to the graves. We're very honoured that you are looking after these brave men who fought in the Second World War. I'm very pleased to meet you. They let me help tend to Uncle Rangi's grave, and I won't leave until I do that. Ka hoki au, ki te wā kāinga, ki te whānau, ki te iwi. Waitaruke in the far north. I've returned to New Zealand to see Paul Thomas once more at his beautiful family urupa. He's going to show me where his brother Adrian will be coming home to. Kia ora, Paul. How are you? I haven't seen you since Malaysia.
Tēnā koe matua. I'm really good, really well.
What a beautiful place.
Tēnā koe.
Kia ora. So,
good to see you.
Show me where your brother's going to be coming home.
Just down here. That's, my father chose that spot quite a long time ago, actually, and finally, hopefully in 2018, we're going to be able to close that chapter in our life, I suppose.
And I know that there are other reasons for wanting him here. What do you think this will be for the mokopuna of the future?
Well, hopefully, it's an education process for our mokopunas, our rangatahi, so that people who are killed serving their country are never ever left overseas ever again. This has come to the end of our partnership in this kaupapa. So, you know, having seen and heard a lot about what I've been doing, where are you going to go with all this now? What do you want for your uncle?
I've made my decision too, and I've come home also to Te Tai Rāwhiti, to tell Mum what I want to do about her brother, My sisters are with me, but I haven't told them or anyone whether I'm happy to leave Uncle Rangi in North Africa or fight to bring him home.
Hi, Mum. Dad. Ka hoki mai au, Mum. Ka hoki mai tātou. I kite au te tuakana ko Uncle Rangi. He's good, Mum. He's in the sunshine over there. He's surrounded by prayers every day, the prayers that are coming from the Muslim people.
Wow.
And the prayers are for, not just for Uncle Rangi, but for all of the others who died at Point 209 and throughout Tunisia. So he's good. But he's not home, Mum. And so he must come home. Mum, I've brought you a small gift from the desert of Tunisia. So this is a desert rose. Until Uncle comes home, this will make sure that we will remember to do that for you because you wanted him home.
Someone will whisper, I love you true.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on Air.